Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller. I'm the host of Strong Mind, Strong Body. And in my upcoming episode, I talk about trauma, but trauma beyond the buzzword, trauma beyond social media and all the hype around trauma. And we talk about what trauma really is and some powerful ways to heal without staying stuck. And I didn't tackle this on my own. I had Suzanne Wiseman on, and she is a psychotherapist who specializes in EMDR and neurofeedback. And so she is a trauma therapist. I think that you will find this episode to be super valuable and packed with information about trauma, about healing, and about trauma being part of your story, but not your whole story. So I hope you enjoy the episode. And afterwards, I hope you'll like, follow, subscribe, and hopefully leave a 5-star review. And I'll see you in the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. And today we are deep diving into a topic that is kind of heavy, but we're going to keep it on the lighter side. We're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about beyond the buzz of trauma, like what it really is and how we can heal without staying stuck. Everywhere you look now, all over social media, we see and we read and we hear about trauma. So I connected with a dear friend that I know from, speaking of social media, and I do love her content, and her name is Suzanne Wiseman. And she is a psychotherapist. She's also EMDR trained, and she is a trauma specialist. So I know that Suzanne could do a really good job of kind of introducing us to trauma and helping us to distinguish what is it really and how do we heal from it. So Suzanne, I'm going to bring you in and have you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I am Suzanne and I'm a psychotherapist as well as Angie, and I specialize in trauma. I offer EMDR, neurofeedback, and I'm also trained in clinical hypnotherapy. And it's great to meet and to actually connect with Angie's audience and Angie.
Yes. Thank you. And I love that you've got so many different modalities. I love that you do the hypnotherapy, you do the EMDR, you do neurofeedback. You've got all kinds of different modalities that you can connect with clients depending, I would assume, on the type of trauma that they're experiencing and also where, I guess, as a clinician, you feel like you have the most success. But let's go ahead and get to kind of the core of it. So trauma, no doubt, is like it's kind of a buzzword, and I hate to say that because it's a big deal. Trauma is a serious thing, but it's all over social media. And so as someone who works with trauma daily, Suzanne, how do you define actual trauma versus what we might sometimes see as trauma labeled online?
Yeah, you're right, Angie, that trauma does seem to be a buzzword, but I do work with trauma every day, and I would define it as an experience or experiences that actually overwhelm our central nervous system and impact us, how safe we feel or not, how we're able to connect with others, and how we're able to cope. So it's not just the event or events. It's a physiological and psychological response to it. And yet we do see the word trauma used to describe or to define emotional pain and stress. And while I don't want to minimize those emotions still matter, all distress is not trauma. Trauma really is a physiological and a psychological response that impacts us at the moment and can impact us at any time in life if we're not able to process it.
Yes. And again, we're not minimizing major stress, but there is a difference. Not every time that we experience major stress is considered trauma. And so I think it is important to kind of have that distinction. And as we go through the show, I have no doubt all of our listeners will have more and more of an idea of what we're saying here, right? This is just kind of the introduction. So you talk about how trauma is stored in our senses and kind of bits and pieces. Can you walk us through what that means? And let me clarify a little bit. Like, how does a significant life event get stored in our body? And why might someone suddenly feel triggered like years later and they don't even understand why?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a really good question. So, whenever we're experiencing a traumatic event and we're not able to process it for whatever reason, because we're a child and we have no control, or it's just safety, whatever it is, it actually it gets frozen in our senses. So, what we hear, see, smell, and in our emotions, and what we're noticing in our bodies. Okay, and it's in little bits and pieces. So any one of those little bits or pieces can be triggered at any time. So um, if it could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be a chair scraping, or it could be anything. And then when we're triggered, we are reacting to the event that happened before. So I always use the example, I wasn't, but pretend I was in a car accident when I was 5. And if something was triggered, say burnt rubber, I smell something that's similar to that and I'm triggered, I am no longer adult Suzanne psychotherapist. I'm 5-year-old Suzanne, because I'm actually in the midst of that event. So, and do I necessarily understand where that trigger came from or why I'm acting like a 5-year-old child? No. And people that see me don't understand why I'm acting like a 5-year-old child as well. So that's how it can just come up at any points in our lives, and why it's so important to be able to process and lean into our feelings about the event.
Yeah, because to your point, when it gets stored in our senses, it could be a sound, it could be a vision of somebody who looks like somebody who was a part of that event.
Yeah,
It could be a smell, because our senses, like when we are sort of out of body, our senses are still present. Is that an okay way of explaining it?
that's a great way to explain it. It's like they take over.
Yeah, because it's during a seriously traumatic event, we sort of almost step outside of ourselves, our cognitive selves, but our senses are still present. And so what we remember is our core senses and what came up there, but we don't necessarily cognitively have the words to speak about the trauma out loud, right? And so that's why there's different modalities that can help drive down the ego and help get to these parts that we can't really process cognitively. But that's why those senses make such a difference. Like you said, you could be going back to 5-year-old Suzanne, but no one around you understands why are you reacting to this burnt rubber smell. But
Yeah.
it's your body, your body's way of connecting to that without intentionally doing so.
Yeah.
Um, so you said that you and I have talked, and I was reading some of your stuff, and you say that trauma teaches us kind of some distorted ideas or things about ourselves. Can you give us an example of what those distortions might look like or sound like?
Yeah, sure. So just pretend that I was back in the car accident, and my distorted belief might be that I'm not safe. Okay. And so I live my life believing that I'm not safe, and I'm continually looking for reasons to show me that I am safe or I'm not safe. And I always use the example. So say there's 3 of us in the room. So there's myself, you, and a third person. And that third person, raises their eyebrow. And I'm coming from a place that I think, I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and I trust life. And I think, oh, that's so cool. They can raise your eyebrow. I can't do that. You're coming from a place of distrust. And so you see someone raise their eyebrow and you immediately react as that, I can't trust them. They're judging me, and, I'm not safe. Yet you and I are looking at the exact same person, and we
Yeah.
see something different. So our truths are different based on a distorted belief about ourselves. Or, it can be that I'm not safe, I'm not good enough, I'm to blame, I'm responsible. And then we lead our life to prove that that's right or not right. But it all revolves around this distorted belief that we have about ourselves, and how do we put ourselves out there. If I feel like I'm not good enough, I'm at work and I'm not putting up my hand saying, I disagree, or I deserve this job. I'm hiding and I'm being invisible, because in my core, I don't believe I deserve that, because I'm not good enough.
Well, and it's like you said, you go through life either proving or disproving this belief system. And so and it always, or not always, but it kind of boils down to that safety sense, or where am I in relation to this other people or this situation? And so things are identified as being more than they are, if you will. And it could come across as almost being paranoid, but it's really just that trauma response where it's not that someone's paranoid, it's that they're responding to people in the world around them from a different place and space because they haven't resolved all that past trauma.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, were you going to say something to
I would
that?
say they're living what they believe is their truth.
Yeah.
But it's distorted.
Yeah, exactly. And it is their truth. It's just that their truth is based off of what happened during that event or that series of events. So, there's seemingly, and you and I have talked about this, and we are going to tread lightly on this one, but there's seemingly a cultural shift around trauma, and where sometimes people over identify with the trauma buzzword. Okay. And so I'm traumatized, therefore I can't. And then sometimes trauma is used as fuel for growth. Like, I made it through this, I processed this, I went through years of therapy for this.
Mhm.
What is the difference between kind of acknowledging your trauma and working through it, or kind of being stuck in it because maybe it is an identifier, like it is well, I went through this, therefore I can't do this?
Yeah. That's a really good question. We'll tread lightly with it, but most often people that they've acknowledged their trauma, okay, and they recognize when it's coming up, and the resilience or the ability to ask for help and recognize it's something that happened to them. It does not define who they are. Yet someone who kind of sits in their diagnosis, it can have some side benefits as well, not conscious ones. But if I have a diagnosis of PTSD, perhaps I have less expectations of myself or less responsibilities, or people are around me more to support me. And then I don't really have to challenge myself. I can sit in my diagnosis, and it's not comfortable, but it's comforting because it's what I know. And if I'm also thinking about a distorted belief of I'm not good enough, then I guess I might deserve to sit in my diagnosis.
Well, and I kind of hear you say that some of it is, some of it is because you said, like, those who work through their trauma know that it doesn't define them. They
Yeah.
know that it happened to them, and they know that they experienced this, and they know how powerful and tragic it was, but they are not going to let it define them.
Mhm.
And then when they don't work through it, then maybe it becomes almost like a way to remove themselves from not necessarily responsibility, but kind of maybe taking more risks and so maybe that's the defining factor is if you have been through a truly traumatic experience, if you can process it, you can get to a place where it can help you propel forward. It can help you live your best life, not negating, but actually not even accepting, but working through the trauma. Whereas, and I had some previous episodes where I talked about diagnosis and
Mhm.
how sometimes diagnosis is powerful in that it gives us answers, and sometimes we don't want to use it as a way to stay stuck. Well, I'm this, therefore I can't do this. We
Yeah.
want to use it as a way to say, oh, I'm so glad you gave me this information. Now, can you help me
Yeah.
learn how to manage this in my life so that I can live my best life?
Yeah, it's a diagnosis a diagnosis of PTSD is no different than a diagnosis of, a physical illness, right? So it's, what am I going to do with it now?
Right.
Yeah.
Are we going to hand it over and say, well, it is what it is?
Yeah.
Or are we going to fight it every step of the way to still live our best lives? And
Yeah.
I think that that's an important step.
Yeah.
So you, as a trauma therapist, Suzanne, you use these different modalities. I mentioned you use EMDR, you
Mhm.
use neurofeedback, you use hypnotherapy. We can't get super technical here, but how do those types of approaches help somebody process trauma differently than just talk therapy? Because I already mentioned that we sort of go offline, right? Like when we're the victim of trauma, we go offline. So it's for somebody to say, tell me about what happened, it's like, I don't have words. So
I do, so the difference between, well, first of all, talk therapy, you're right, we're offline, our cognition's just not available to us, but there's what happened, the trauma is not stored in our cognition, it's stored in our emotions, or like in our lower or reptilian brain, and they're not talking to one another. So I might understand that I'm upset because I have been in a car accident, and I can say, oh, that's what it was. Is not helpful. So I know that's all, that's it. So EMDR really focuses on feelings. There's not a lot of talking once you get started. So you're processing, and you're taking the little bits and pieces of trauma and giving them a beginning, middle, and end. So closure. It doesn't change what happened. It just means that when I think about it, I don't feel like I'm in the middle of it. And then it really helps you go from a distorted belief about yourself to a positive belief about yourself. And because there's not a lot of talking, the chances of being re-traumatized are very little, or much, much less than in talk therapy. And it's also, sorry, what was I going to say? So it's all focused on feelings. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But that's the main difference between EMDR and talk therapy. I was going to say that with talk therapy, things can get bigger. Like I told you I was in a car accident, and you asked me a question of what happened to the windshield. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Maybe something did happen to the windshield. And so what was maybe a smaller car accident becomes bigger and bigger, and it stays in my cognition, which ends up staying in my body and in my central nervous system as well. And then I hold on to it. So EMDR removes that risk or that threat of re-traumatizing or making the trauma bigger than it was to start with.
Well, and to your point, if we start talking about something, even if you just think on an everyday level, I start telling a friend a story.
Yeah.
Or let's say that something happens, and my friend says, tell me about it, tell me about it. I'm like, oh, I don't even want to do that. If I open Pandora's box, and then I do it. I start talking about it. And the next thing you know, I'm triggered again. And now I'm all mad again. And I'm all feisty again because I've invited it back in. And take that times a millionfold when you're talking about trauma. Again, to your point, you are asking somebody to talk about something that is truly, truly deeply impactful to their system. Whereas if you use something like EMDR, you're strictly working with feelings. There's not a lot of talk. And so it gives the body time to process it because it's where trauma is actually stored anyway. And so what about neurofeedback? Because I know that's one of your probably favorite modalities right now. Yes. What about neurofeedback?
So neurofeedback, I make it sound like the greatest thing since sliced bread, but everyone gets to decide. But what it's doing, it's completely non-invasive. The system I use is called neurooptimal neurofeedback. But what it's doing, it's helping to create new neural pathways. And when it's doing that, it's releasing what's stored in the existing ones. So it's helping you go from a place of discomfort to feeling more flexible, more resilient, and confident. And it works with the brain's natural ability to heal itself, so neuroplasticity. But what's so great about it on its own is that it's going to help release what's stored in your central nervous system in your body without actually having to visit or to talk about a place or an event that you wish that you never had been in the first place. So it really just calmed your central nervous system so I can respond instead of react. And I can deal with what life throws me, like what life throws my way much better when I'm feeling flexible and resilient.
So it's calming the system versus whereas like with serious trauma, talking it through could actually have the opposite effect. So it's kind of calming the system and getting the system in a more kind of down regulated state, if you will, so that you can process it and not have to lift it by giving it language and opening it back up again. Is that okay?
That's exactly it. And when I marry it with therapy, with EMDR as well, what's really helpful about neurofeedback is that it helps to increase a window of tolerance. So you are able to visit or like to process something or even to look at feelings more than you would be otherwise, so that you're not petrified to to look at a car accident or something that else that may have happened to you in your life. Or I think I didn't mention that sometimes trauma is not just events that happen, but it can be events that didn't happen. Like, as a child, if you didn't have the attachment and the love, and there's, emotional neglect and things, that can have as great of an impact, if not a greater impact. So it's not just what happened to me, it can be what didn't happen to me. So the neurofeedback just helps calm me enough so I'm able to take a look and start the process of healing.
Yeah, it's like filling in the gaps of what was missing instead of what happened, but what, to your point, what didn't happen, like what's missing from our attachment in our formative years. So when it comes to the brain during real trauma healing, what is actually happening in the brain? What how do these different therapies, what is that too big of a question? Maybe that's too meaty of a question.
So what you mean, what's actually happening in the brain when therapy is happening or when trauma is happening?
Like let's say during like neurofeedback, what's going on in the brain? I know you said the system starts to calm down, kind of down regulate.
Yeah. So the system that I use, the neurooptimal system, it's like a mirror for your brain. It's letting you know what's happening. So you're actually listening to music. It's very relaxing and calming. And then there's interruptions. It's kind of like saying, hey, Angie, pay attention. Because what happens through life, and especially through trauma, it's like we get hijacked and we're stuck. And that's the only way that our brains know how to function. So if you say to me, like, Suzanne, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, right. I don't need to do this. I'm learning a different way to take care of myself instead of saying in fight or flight, or saying that no matter what happens, I always react this way. You look at me like this and I'm going to yell at you. I can be like, instead you look at me like that and I'm like, what's she looking at? How do I want to respond to that without automatically jumping to reactions from the past? That makes sense.
Yeah, I like that a lot actually, because it's just kind of calming and stabilizing the brain. It's kind of teaching the brain not to be as reactive. It's teaching the brain actually kind of like, hey, I'm safe, and getting you out of this constant sense of fight or flight. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's teaching the brain to work at its best, whatever its best is, right?
Yeah, definitely. So how do you help clients balance this, like during trauma, this, it happened to me, um, but I'm still responsible for my choices moving forward. Like, how do we help clients with that? Yes, this happened. Yes, it happened to you. Yes, it was tragic. Yes, it's sad and it's so many things. But how do we then say, and we still have to be responsible for life?
So good question. Part of it I will use I'll say for EMDR, if we're going from a distorted belief about ourselves to a positive belief. So if my distorted belief was, I'm not safe, my positive belief is, it's over now, I am safe. So I'm going to ask you, what would you like to believe about yourself? And then, because EMDR is not lots of talking, but still, what does that look like? Where do you want to be, and how can we get you there? Okay. And then I often say that yes, it's a lot of work, or it can be a lot of work, but this work is for you. If you've experienced trauma in your life, you've worked really hard to stay away from it, or to cope with it, or to do whatever it is that you need to do. This time, when you're working at processing and healing, you're the one that's going to benefit the most. I mean, ultimately, other people will benefit in the end with our relationships. But so it's hard work. It's acknowledging it, and sometimes it's also learning from others. And I'll use the example, maybe not a car accident, but if something happened to me when I was a child, or something happened to a client when they're a child, I might ask, and they were, if I'm the client and I'm taught that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I said, what was it about that person that they're a reliable source to teach you that I'm not good enough? It was somebody that had neglected me or had abused me or something. How are they an expert are they somebody, if you met them now, would you trust them?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. That's a really good way of putting it. It's sort of taking those distortions and in a way giving them some kind of alternative ways of processing or looking at those distortions, like opening up the lens a little bit, right? The distortion is this narrow tight lens of what they know, and then when you take the distortion, you say, but give me proof. You're sort of broadening the lens and lengthening the lens and taking a step back. And to your point, if this person was abusive, how are they a credible source for saying that you weren't worthy or that you deserved what you experienced? And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And I also kind of think that if we're willing to process trauma, we're willing to get help, what we're really saying is, I want my control back. Yes, this happened to me. Yes, this was tragic. Yes, this affected me. And yes, I can go in and I can get help and I can take my power back.
Yeah.
Because if not, it's going to keep happening to me for the rest of my life. And therefore, whatever happened maintains control and we become victims to that situation for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Ooh, right? Like
So that's exactly it. It's like, maybe I didn't have the childhood that I wanted. It was taken from me because of traumatic events. I do want to have my adult life. What am I going to do about it now? Because now I am in control of my life and the choices that I make. And they're not always easy choices to make, yet they're my choices to make.
Exactly. We take our power back.
Yeah.
A lot of us, I mean, let's be real. I mean, as we age and we have different experiences, we might realize some holes in our childhood, in our formative years. And at the same time, it's my belief that yes, and I mean, there was some major holes, and I want to make the most of my life. I don't want to stay stuck in that, because that means that for the rest of my life, whatever happened or didn't happen is going to rule my life. And I personally think that would make for kind of a not very healthy life, right?
It's a limiting life, that's for sure.
Right. So, one last question for you, Suzanne, before we go. If someone's listening and they recognize themselves either as someone who's stuck in their trauma story or someone who's been pushing feelings away, what's one thing they could do today to start moving toward healthier healing?
I always say acknowledge our feelings and notice where we feel them in our bodies. Do a scan, top of your head to the tip of your toes. Where is it? It's in my chest, it's in my gut. Put your hands there. Give yourself compassion for feeling it. Okay, don't push it away, because otherwise it just festers and become worse. And maybe I'm doing a podcast. I can't feel anxious or whatever it is that I am. So, but I'm still going to say, wow, I have compassion for myself for having this feeling, for having experienced what I've experienced, and I'm going to, I'm taking care of myself. So that's the first thing that I always say. If that makes sense. There's breathing, there's grounding. Put your feet on the floor. We can pull on our ears. EMDR, I'd say to tap, because it's very calming. You can tap on your lap as well if you're someplace where you don't want to see. When we cross our arms, we're keeping both sides of our brain more engaged than if we were just doing.
Because it's the bilateral, right? It's always the bilateral tapping. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also it feels a bit like a hug. So who
It
doesn't
does.
love a hug? So but Suzanne, I really appreciate you coming on and tackling a heavy topic in 30 minutes. That is hard to do. But I really wanted to put it out there to my Strong Mind, Strong Body audience and say, look, we're not trying to heal trauma in this episode. And we are not being trauma experts to the world. What we're just doing is say, hey, we keep hearing about trauma. What is it? How does it get stored in the body? How do we heal properly? And what are some steps that we can take so that it doesn't rule our lives, but in fact, it is part of our story, just not the whole story. So, Suzanne, if people want to ask you any further questions, how might they reach you?
You can send me an email at a mouthful swisemancounseling@gmail.com, but you can also send me a DM on Instagram. I'm at neurofeedback_swiseman.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Suzanne, and thank you to our Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you to our Strong Mind, Strong Body audience. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about some of the lighter stuff, some of the heavier stuff, and all the stuff in between. We'll see you next week.